welcome to my very first webcast keynote. I've never done this before, so please bear with me as I just get used to the fact that I'm not actually talking to you or with you today. I usually give a keynote in front of people on a stage, or at the very least I'm doing a webinar where you're participating live while I'm chatting. So I'm going to talk to you today about academic advising and sort of where we're at, where things are going, a little bit about the future, obviously my little graphic there with a robot, because I think sometimes when people think about academic advising, they think more about advising from the context of sort of that old school sense of things. Advising isn't typically an area in higher education that gets the latest and greatest tools. You may have noticed that we oftentimes have to do paper files still. Maybe look around. I think there's supposed to be around 55 of you. Look around and sort of see who's still using paper files. Is this something you're engaged in? And I think that I love these graphics that are on Flickr from a place like the Smithsonian, where they showcase sort of the olden times when these guys were just playing around with a parachute. And I think sometimes when it comes to advising, especially with online students, we're still kind of playing around, we're still kind of experimenting, and we're not really certain as to yet how it's going to all work out. Now, who am I? Why am I talking to you? Well, my name is Eric Stoller, and what I do for a living is I write, speak, and consult around technology, strategic communications, social media, online learning. I like to sort of play in the higher education soup. I'm all over the place when it comes to how we work with students, how we support students. I've given keynotes all over the place at various conferences, various events. And as you can see there, that my parents, they still have no idea what I do for a living. So it's probably okay if you're still sort of on the fence as to what that means. Now, in my former career, I used to work at Oregon State University. I went to Oregon State for graduate school, and I received a Master's of Education in Higher Education Administration. This is actually a photo of my old office when I was an academic advisor there. You can see my Mark Rothko print and my Spock bobblehead, as well as my little Yoda figurine there. And while I was involved as an academic advisor at Oregon State University, I was heavily engaged with NACADA. I did a lot of stuff when it came to technology seminars and workshops with NACADA, and for a very long time, NACADA was my professional home when I came to being a practitioner. As you can see from my office there, I met with students face to face. I also met with them through Skype and through some various other channels when it came to sort of distance advising, a little bit of online advising. In addition to consulting and speaking that I do, I write for InsideHigherEd.com. I do the Student Affairs and Technology blog, where I write about a variety of topics from academic advising, career services, enrollment management, accessibility, social media, online learning, just a wide array of things that are relevant to sort of what's going on right now in higher education. Last but not least, I'm based in Boston, so if you're wondering where I'm at, where I'm broadcasting to you from today, is actually from my apartment in Boston. It's a sunny day here in Boston, so I've actually got the blinds turned down so I don't get washed out in the image. And here's the cool thing about this presentation for me is that I'm actually doing this presentation using iMovie. My slide graphics, I designed those in Apple Keynote. I could have done that in Photoshop. I had just, in this case, taken a slide deck that I had created and imported it into Apple's iMovie so that I can do transitions, video effects, and whatnot. So I think when it comes to advising students online, it's important to sort of look at all the tools that we have at our disposal and see which ones are going to work, which ones aren't, and dabble a little bit, experiment a little bit, because really at the end of the day, what makes advising really neat is that we get to sort of play around with all these different facets of the job, from working with students around course selection, major, how they progress through a particular program, maybe it's career advising aspects, maybe it's just simple things like letters of recommendation. So there's a lot of things that we do as advisors, and online now has kind of changed that. It's made it a little bit trickier. So speaking of online, should you be so inclined, I'd love it if you tweet away at least some of your thoughts and ideas from this particular webcast. The hashtag for our event is #cool2013. And my username on Twitter is @EricStoller. And I'll try to check out these tweets later on. I'm actually not going to be around the day of this broadcast, so I'll have to go back and look through. So please feel free to tweet at me, tweet some questions, some observations, some thoughts, some insights, and I will definitely try to get back to you when I get a chance, because I'll be able to go back through Twitter and see what you've tweeted. In addition to that, I'd also appreciate it if you're so inclined to get onto Instagram and take some pictures. Use the hashtag Cool13, as well as my Instagram username, which is @EricStoller, because I'd love to see sort of who's watching, who's paying attention. Are you all watching in your office? Are there a group of you? Because I always find it's kind of nice to humanize these sort of distance-based events where we can't see one another. Now, if any of you have read my blog at Inside Higher Ed, you know that sometimes I like to make what I call sort of the subversive comments. I like to sort of ask a lot of why-style questions. I want to know how things work, why things work, and what we're doing when it comes to helping our students, advising our students. And one of the things that I think happens a lot of times with online academic advising is it can get kind of this sense of where we're really just going through the motions. We're using email as opposed to all the tools. How many of you use Microsoft Outlook? And in your Outlook, per se, let's just say, for example, we're looking at your inbox, and maybe you have this inbox here where it says, 1,577 unread messages. You're not really filing your email, you're not really organizing your email, you're not really managing your email is sort of managing you. And I think that sometimes that's an issue that a lot of us face when it comes to what we're doing, how we're doing it. When it comes to advising online students, we really can't rely just on email. As Grumpy Cat and myself both agree, advising online students is so much more than just about email. It's about all the tools, it's about all the interactions, it's about all the things that we can do to not only advise our students, but model new technologies with them and for them so that they realize that they're not necessarily cognizant of the fact that they're learning, but when you're advising students using the latest and greatest tools, you're teaching them skills that are going to be useful throughout their entire experience as a student and beyond. And so please don't just use email for advising your students who are online, because you use email for your in-person students, and yet there's such a richness that takes place when it comes to advising those students in person, and we want to translate that to the online atmosphere. One of the things that can be extremely powerful for advising students in the online space is a simple thing that I like to call a webcam. I know that sounds a little tongue-in-cheek here, and I know for some of you, maybe you're a Blackboard user, maybe you use Blackboard Collaborate, maybe you use a Google Plus Hangout, but a webcam on your end and on your students' side of things can be instrumental to developing rapport, for using just that face-to-face interaction that you have on in person, kind of translating that to the online space. And I know that maybe there's future plans for webcams, and I really hope you get on board with that, because I find that webcams can be extremely useful when you're working with students, because it's kind of a skill set of the future, is sort of being able to chat with someone through a computer with video, and have them see you, have them read your body language, they can see your facial expressions. It's extremely important. Now the other side of this is really something that I think a lot of people forget about. It's the audio portion. Having just a sort of cheapo microphone plugged into the audio jack on your computer, or maybe just using the audio in your computer, maybe you have a laptop, it's just not going to be as good. The quality is not going to be necessarily as vibrant or as clear, and it's really easy to have a USB powered microphone. I really like the one that I'm using right now is called a Samson. It's just suspended above my head on kind of a mic stand that you can't see it really in the shot here. But it's a great way to pick up your voice. It's a great way to know that your desk sounds aren't going to necessarily be picked up when you are shuffling papers around or just clicking and clacking on your keyboard. And USB microphones are right around $100. A webcam, an HD webcam, if you don't have one built into your computer, again, that's about $100. I'm fortunate, I'm using a Apple Thunderbolt display, and it's got an actual camera built in to the top of the monitor here that I'm actually looking at, little green dot that's glowing right now. Now, I know this is sounding like a lot, as if, there's already a lot of logistics that you have to take care of. Academic advising, every single student that you work with is going to give you something different. There's always a different opportunity, a different challenge, a unique way for you to support those students. And so, online advising kind of looks like this. It kind of looks like an MC Escher graphic where you've got things just going all over the place, and how do you manage them? And I think the biggest thing to remember is that academic advisors have sort of this Swiss Army knife appeal to them. You all are able to do so many different things. And sometimes it just comes down to the fact that you have to have someone say, hey, you are rock stars, you are champions. You have the capability to do what a lot of other people can't, because you're taking academic advising to the next level. You're doing it online, you're doing it with people from all over the place, and you're going to use your webcam, you're going to use your web microphone, and it's going to be great. And you really are those rock stars. Now, sometimes there's going to be things you might have to overcome a little bit. One of those things is this thing called Blackboard. Blackboard isn't necessarily known for being the friendliest of all places or services. I think sometimes with Blackboard, our schools have contracts with them. We have to use it. It's something that a lot of places use, and yet at the same time we find ourselves using other tools simply because Blackboard sometimes just doesn't give us what we need. I went through Twitter and I found some interesting commentary from students here. There's Alexandra who says, what the fluffing fluff, I hate Blackboard. And then you see Jazz who says, I hate Blackboard, LOL. Okay, I don't hate it, but I have a strong dislike towards it. And then finally you see Harley, and Harley says, I kind of want to do fall semester on Blackboard again and stack my money. I got a 3.7 last semester. I love online courses. Now, whether or not you choose to use Blackboard or other online services for communicating with students, for advising students, I would say this. If a lot of your professors are using Blackboard and they're using things like Blackboard Collaborate and they're using web video and maybe some audio, then advisors should use those tools as well, because it helps you in terms of modeling how to appropriately use these services for your students so that they too can use these services when it comes to their learning and their own growth as members of your community. Now, the other side of this is, of course, mobile. Academic advising isn't necessarily known for its sort of mobile-esque nature. However, a lot of our students are getting access to their materials online and to us via mobile devices. Case in point is Blackboard's mobile app. Here's a screenshot from my iPad, actually, and this is from the community college system at Kentucky. And you can just see it looks very different from sort of the Blackboard that you're used to seeing. It's a little bit more user-friendly, a little bit more human-friendly, and I think that that's a really good thing, actually, because the sort of simpler that Blackboard gets, the better, because sometimes I think they add too many bells and whistles. Here's another screenshot here, and it just shows you the layout and the way people can communicate back and forth with people. And honestly, I think this is the future of Blackboard. I think this is the future of academic advising, is sort of having maybe an iPad with you at all times, being able to go out and about, and not necessarily being tied to a laptop or a desktop, because with your iPad you have audio, you have the camera, and so you can do all kinds of really interesting things when it comes to mobile. The other side of this, of course, is our website. A website that is mobile ready for academic advising is extremely necessary. It's extremely crucial. This is a tweet from my friend Janine Olliston. And Janine's the Director of Communications for Student Affairs at the University of British Columbia up in Vancouver. And the cool thing about Janine and her team up there is that they've made their website responsive, which means it looks really good on a desktop screen, a large monitor, and then it also looks really good on a tablet and or a smartphone. And so, academic advising online and distance, we got to start thinking more about the entire package of how we're communicating with students. If it's just email, if it's just telephone, that's great for now. However, there's such a great plethora of tools that we can use to make what we're doing that much more effective. And speaking of tools to help us, sort of expand and amplify our efforts to do something far beyond just sort of that one-to-one advising piece, is social media. Social media provide us with all sorts of avenues and channels, and here's just a smattering of the tools from Instagram to Vine to Google Plus to Reddit, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter. There's just all kinds of different things that we can use. Now, speaking of social media tools and usage, one of the things that a lot of people will ask me is that, well, they'll say, or I shouldn't say they'll ask me, they'll comment on, they'll say that, well, our students aren't on social media, you know, with various age demographics and cohorts, and they'll just say that our students aren't there. And I'll say, well, the data shows that pretty much everybody from a majority percentage perspective is using social media. This is from the Pew Research Center. And the black bar there says that there's just a high 60+% of users are using social media. And you can just see the numbers actually, except for maybe the 65+ cohort, everyone's up above 50% easily in terms of social networking use. And so I think that's an important thing to consider when you're looking at your data, when you're looking at your students, is to say, we're using social media, and how are we using it for academic advising? And I think one of the things is that we don't necessarily have to communicate a lot of the logistical information that we communicate to our students using social media, but maybe we could communicate various maybe events, workshops and programs, and just model. Again, part of academic advising is really just modeling to our students what it means to be present in these spaces. And one of the largest spaces that exists is Facebook. At this point, Facebook has 1 billion active users. That's a lot of people, no matter how you slice it. The other thing with Facebook is that that billion people who are active on its site, that doesn't even include China, because right now Facebook is banned in China. It's blocked in China. And so think about a world in which China and the people of China are on Facebook. That would just be an astronomical increase in the number of users on Facebook. And I think it would really, Facebook right now is already sort of an internet within the internet. And so maybe you have a Facebook page that you use to post relevant academic advising information in addition to your website. Maybe you use it as a way to sort of create subgroups so you can create community within communities for certain majors or sub-majors or minors. Because I think it's just a great place, because a lot of us are very savvy with Facebook. It's been around since 2004. It's 9 years old now, so we've got a good handle on things. Now, the other thing about Facebook is that as an academic advisor, one of my sort of favorite things about the site is that a lot of my former students are connected with me on Facebook. They sent me friend requests when I was an academic advisor, and my policy then, and still to this day, is if a student wants to be my friend on Facebook, they can, absolutely. I will accept them as a friend on Facebook. However, I will not go out and find them. I won't ask them to be my friend. I won't search for them. They have to find me. And again, I'm modeling what it means to be a good digital citizen to them in that space. And so I know sometimes we question that, whether or not we should be friends with our students on Facebook. But the thing with Facebook is that the definition of friends on that site versus friends in real life are a little bit different. We're going to be friends with people on Facebook who we're friends with in real life. We have family members on there, loved ones. And at the same time, we have colleagues and people that we know or affiliated with or associated with, but we're not necessarily friends. And so I think it's okay to friend our students, to model good behavior, and again, maybe use the platform as a way to communicate and engage. Now, my favorite social media channel at this point, it has got to be Twitter. I've been on Twitter since 2007. It's been around since 2006. I've been cultivating a community of people who follow me and who I follow on Twitter. It's just a great tool for all sorts of things when it comes to professional development, networking, asking questions, answering questions, finding resources, and really just connecting with people at all levels. Hierarchy doesn't necessarily exist on Twitter. Things have kind of been flattened out a little bit with Twitter. And so when I was an academic advisor, the nice thing would be is that my students would follow me on Twitter, and I could choose whether or not I wanted to follow them back. But they could get relevant information from me if I tweeted out things that were important to them. And sometimes they would DM me if I was following them and they were following me back to get sort of questions, quick questions answered, and maybe it would lead to a follow-up on our official email accounts. But if you're not using Twitter, that's okay, because I think sometimes with Twitter it can be a little intimidating. We think that we have to have this sort of Dell computer sort of set up like their social media listening command center. And that's just not the case when it comes to using Twitter, especially social media in general. It can be very simple with your laptop and an internet connection. You don't have to have the blue lights and be all fancy like Dell here. And Twitter is extremely versatile. And what happens a lot of times when people ask me about Twitter is they want to give me about 30 seconds of their time to tell them all about it, to tell them sort of why they should get onto it, why Twitter is important. And I would say what I would encourage you to do if you're not knowledgeable or fluent already with Twitter is to go to business.twitter.com. It's a great resource for case studies, resources, how companies have used Twitter, just the lingo and the jargon, things like hashtags and retweets and favorites and mentions, because Twitter has its own sort of vernacular, its own jargon that the community has sort of created as its sort of the norm of how things are. And so Twitter is just phenomenal in terms of its versatility. However, there's a bit of a learning curve. When I joined Twitter in March of 2007, it took me a couple years to really figure out that the best part about Twitter is the community of users. And if you follow the right number of people, if you get connected with an amazing array of individuals, they can share awesome things, and you can find out information, be it news, entertainment, music, any information relevant to higher education and academic advising. It's all there. And so I would highly encourage you to check out business.twitter.com if you haven't already gotten onto Twitter, because Twitter is such a great social media site in that it's back and forth. There's a lot of conversation. It's not just a one-way channel. Last but not least, of course, is Google+. I mentioned Google+ earlier with regards to Hangouts. Google+ is interesting because Google is heavily invested in Google+ as their social media network, that they're trying to compete with Facebook. They're trying to really be a major player in this space. Now, I wouldn't worry too much about having a profile or a page for your office. It's useful from a search engine optimization perspective, because if someone searches for you specifically, there's a good chance your Google+ page or profile will come up, because Google can leverage what comes up on search. But one of the nice things about Google+ is that Google+ has these things called Hangouts. And if you haven't done a Hangout yet on Google+, I'd highly encourage you to do it, because unlike, say, Blackboard Collaborate, which can be a little clunky, a little unwieldy, a little maybe not so human-friendly, Google+ Hangouts are amazing in that they're extremely simple to set up. You can have Hangouts with up to 10 people participating, and you can do desktop sharing. You can have collaborative Google Docs happening simultaneously. You can record video through Google+ that can be streamed through YouTube. That's really the best thing, in my opinion, about Google+ right now. And from an academic advising perspective, not only can you use Google+ to interact with your students, maybe to have one-on-one advising sessions or group advising sessions, but you're really, when you work with, again, and I keep saying this over and over again, but when you use these tools with your students, you're teaching them digital literacy. You might not recognize it, and they probably definitely don't recognize it, but you're teaching them skills that are going to be extremely relevant for the jobs of tomorrow. And I think really a big part of academic advising is to make sure that our students succeed not only in the classroom, not only in their current program, but that they succeed in life. Because I think part of being an academic advisor is that whole ethic of care. And if we don't have an ethic of care, that's what drives us. That's what drives the profession. It comes from NACADA. It comes from our shared values as a profession. And so get onto Google+. Have a Hangout. Build rapport with your students, because I think part of the challenge, especially, of online academic advising is building rapport with students. Anything you can do to build rapport, build that connection, because what I want to have happen is for online advising to lead to letters of recommendation for those students that you're working with. It happens all the time in person. Student comes into your office 10, 20 times a year. You develop that relationship over time. Then they apply maybe to grad school or for a job, and you become a reference. You become someone who writes them a letter of recommendation. And the same should be said and should be happening for online students. Now, a little bit more about social media. One of the things about social media that I can't stress enough, and this is about the secret sauce of social media. The secret sauce of social media, sort of the thing that I wish more and more people would recognize, is that the secret behind doing social media well, and from an advising perspective, from doing it well is from understanding the tools yourselves. You have to understand how to use it in order to do it well. And then once you do it well, it helps your students out so much. And so the secret to academic advising plus social media is actually less talk about social media, less sort of just me showing you examples, but actually in you doing it, actively experimenting, trial and error. Now, the other side of this coin, of course, is talking with your students. Maybe your students are all on Twitter. Maybe they're not. Maybe Facebook is where the party's at. Maybe Facebook is where everyone's gathering. Maybe they're on Instagram or on Pinterest. And that's great, because I think you should definitely make sure you're in those places where your students are. But you should also say to yourself, I want my students to finish their program, to graduate, and to continue moving on with their career with a set of skills that make them a better candidate for a job in the future, for just sort of the digital literacy component. And so maybe they're not on Twitter, but you're going to get them onto Twitter, and you're going to teach them how to use Google+. Maybe at orientation you're going to talk to them about how they can use Google+ Hangouts to connect with their advisors. And I think that's really the biggest thing, is talk to your students about what it is that they need, and yet at the same time realize those knowledge gaps, those things that maybe they need but they don't know that they need them. Now, one of the coolest things about academic advising is you get to wear many hats. You just have all these different things that are part of the job, and I know some of you are thinking, well, I like fedoras, and some of you are thinking, I wish I could have that fez with the skull and crossbones on it. But here's the thing, advising, you don't have to know everything. There's a lot of resources out there, there's a lot of information when it comes to things that you can use to sort of improve your practice and get better at what you're doing. I did mention my blog at InsideHigherEd.com, the Student Affairs and Technology blog, because it's got lots of resources, things that you can learn from. The other thing is the Technology and Advising Commission from NACADA. There's just a great core group of people who have worked in the field. George Steele, Karen Thurmond, Laura Pasquini, people who have been in academic advising for quite a while, who really know their stuff when it comes to technology and academic advising. And so I'd encourage you, if you're not already connected to the Technology and Advising Commission, to get connected, and then pop onto Twitter, because there's this hashtag #ACADV, stands for Academic Advising. There's a weekly chat. People share links, they share resources. It's a great experience for academic advisors. Now, I know I'm almost out of time. As a former academic advisor, you get used to the clock. I've been told I have 30 minutes, and so hopefully I'm not going over here. The nice thing about this video is I can actually cut it down so I can come under time. But I want to just emphasize that the beauty of academic advising, in my opinion, especially when it comes to online, is that you're never going to get bored. There's never going to be a dull moment. It's kind of going to be like a Jackson Pollock painting. It could appear to be messy to an outsider, but to you, you're going to know exactly what your students need. You're going to know exactly which tools to use. And so maybe you're using Google+ Hangouts, maybe you're using Twitter and you're posting things on Facebook, and maybe you're using Pinterest or YouTube or Instagram or Tumblr, or maybe a WordPress blog, because there's all these sites and tools that you can use to amplify your practice. And you know what? The hardest thing sometimes is going to be getting over that learning curve. So take some time, experiment, and learn. When I was at Oregon State University, when I was an academic advisor, my ratio of students to myself was 600 to 1. And so I had to use all of these tools at my disposal to make sure that I was connecting with each and every one of my students. Now again, my name is Eric Stoller. I write for InsideHigherEd.com. I can be found at ericstoller.com, and my email is ericstoller@gmail.com. Please feel free to shoot me an email, mention me on Twitter, or check out my website. I'd love to interact more with you as we continue this journey and serving our students and getting better at what we do. So thank you, everyone.